Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, True Scary Stories. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it in your country? Have you shared my channel with your friends yet, or are you keeping these whispers all to yourself? You're nestled in now, aren't you? The blankets are heavy, maybe a little too warm, but that's exactly how you like it when you're inviting in the chill of a true story. You can feel the weight of the air around you, that thick, almost palpable silence that settles in just before a story begins. The kind of silence that usually contains a little pocket of dread. Tonight, we're easing into that dread with a story that's all about a place you feel safest, home. Specifically, that first night in a new apartment, the kind of building that smells faintly of old dust and regret, the kind with thick walls that seem to absorb sound, or maybe, just maybe, amplify the things you don't want to hear. You've settled in, maybe unpacked one box, just enough to find the coffee maker and a blanket, because really, what else do you need? You're lying here now, in the middle of a space that isn't quite yours yet. Everything is waiting. A friendly reminder, the odds of you getting through this night without checking your own door lock are statistically slim, but hey, maybe you'll be the first. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is, just so I know exactly how much sleep you're sacrificing for this little horror show. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that low, unsettling hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the entryway of this new apartment, Unit 3B. The light in the hallway is one of those sickly yellow fluorescents that always seems to flicker just at the edge of your vision. You're holding the key, a heavy brass thing that feels older than you are, and you're looking at the door. It's a sturdy, thick slab of wood, painted an institutional green that has started to chip, revealing layers of cream, black, and maybe even a horrifying faded burgundy underneath. The air inside the apartment is cool, almost refrigerated, even though it's a perfectly warm evening outside. And then you see it. It's the door's most notable, most unsettling feature, and the one you're currently trying to rationalize away, the deadbolt. It's old, heavy-duty hardware, the kind that looks like it belongs on a bank vault, not a tiny rental unit, but it's set into the jamb strangely. You run your fingers over the heavy, solid brass cylinder of the lock, and your skin crawls. The keyhole, the part where you slide in the brass key to engage the bolt, is not on the inside of the door, it's on the outside only. Wait, that's not right. You check again. On the inside face of the door, there's only a simple twist knob for the basic latch lock. The heavy, protective deadbolt, the thing that gives you that reassuring clunk of security, is operated exclusively from the exterior. You can lock yourself out, but you cannot lock yourself in with the deadbolt engaged. You can only secure the door with the deadbolt when you are standing in the dimly lit hallway, facing the door itself. You laugh, a nervous, dry little sound that echoes too loudly in the empty space. It has to be a mistake, a relic of some bygone, bizarre remodeling choice. Maybe it was installed for a homeowner who needed to lock up valuable art before leaving, or maybe it's just a piece of hardware installed upside down by a rushed contractor decades ago. You've read enough true crime to know that even the most mundane places can harbor dark secrets. For instance, the infamous case of Ed Gein, the Plainfield Ghoul, showed us that some of the most heinous acts of depravity can happen right under the nose of a quiet, rural town, using items as common as door locks and everyday furniture to disguise their horrors. It makes you feel slightly nauseous, the thought of that much decay and quiet evil existing in a place that looks so ordinary. You try to move past it. It's just a strange lock, you tell yourself. You drop your keys on the tiny, rickety table you hauled in, the sound a sharp, unwelcome intrusion. You start pacing the small living room, trying to get a sense of the place, but your eyes keep darting back to the door. Every time you turn your back, you feel an inexplicable need to look over your shoulder, as if the apartment itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to fail to notice something fundamental. The urge to call the landlord is strong, but you resist. You don't want to sound like a hysterical tenant on day one. You settle down on your mattress, which is still on the floor, and pull the sheets over you. The building is old, and it has that specific creaking acoustic quality. You can hear the distant murmur of traffic outside, the hum of the refrigerator that came with the unit, and the low, heavy breathing of the building's structure. You try to read, but the words swim. Your mind keeps running scenarios. What if someone comes in? Well, the twist knob lock works. It provides a measure of security. But what if someone else has a key to that exterior deadbolt? The thought makes the hairs on your arms stand up. A secondary key floating around somewhere, belonging to the previous tenant, or worse, the landlord. You remember an obscure superstition you once read about called the sleep paralysis hag, or old hag syndrome, which has been recorded in cultures around the world for centuries. The lore states that during sleep paralysis, a shadowy, often malicious female entity sits on your chest, restricting your breath and movement. What's chilling isn't the supernatural element, but the fact that this specific experience, a sense of pressure and inability to move, is so universal across human cultures, suggesting a deep, ancient fear of vulnerability and restriction. Your apartment, right now, feels like a physical manifestation of that paralysis, a place where you are vulnerable to forces on the outside, unable to secure yourself against them. The logical part of your brain tries to assert itself. It's an old building. Things are weird. You get up and walk to the door again. The wood grain is rough under your fingers. You press your ear against the cool surface, listening. Silence. The same empty, thick silence of the hallway. You imagine what it would look like if someone was out there, slipping a key into the deadbolt hole, turning it with a soft click. You shudder. It reminds you of a time you were locked out of your car in the rain, and a helpful stranger offered to jimmy the lock for you. You realize that a good, darkly humorous joke would be, "My therapist told me I need to be more open to strangers. So, I left my apartment door unlocked. Now I have a new roommate and a missing kidney." Progress, right? You smirk weakly. The humor doesn't stick. You are acutely aware of the lack of security. You've seen countless documentaries on building codes. This apartment is in a safe neighborhood. But is it safe from the building itself? You walk over to the window and look out at the street. It's quiet, just the glow of a distant street light cutting through the darkness. You consider opening the window and just climbing out, walking away, leaving the meager pile of possessions you just brought in. But that's ridiculous. You just signed a lease. You just paid the security deposit. You have to stay. You have to figure this out. You look back at the door. You're starting to perceive the hardware, not just as a set of metal parts, but as a deliberate statement, an intention. Researchers disagree on whether fear responses in humans are purely neurological reactions to immediate danger, or if they are also deeply rooted cultural and sociological constructs influenced by architecture and isolation. Right now, your body is screaming that the door is a danger, regardless of what the science says about the origins of your panic. You remember the landlord's face during the lease signing. He had those dead, watery eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. He rushed you through the walkthrough, pulling your attention away from details like this one. You had asked him about the building's history, and he just waved a hand dismissively. Old, sturdy, good bones. You pace back to the door one last time before forcing yourself to lie down. You push your foot against the bottom of the door, just testing its strength. It doesn't budge. You tell yourself that the regular twist knob lock is enough. It will hold. It has to. A second dark joke forms in your mind, this time about the state of modern rentals. I asked my landlord if the apartment came with any amenities. He said, only the constant low-grade fear that you are never truly alone. I gave him 5 stars. We slide under the blanket again. You close your eyes, trying to focus on your breathing. You try to conjure a soothing mental image, something simple and safe. But the image that keeps returning is that polished brass keyhole, the one on the outside, and the thought of a key, a second key sliding into it. You realize this is like a bad relationship. My biggest fear isn't dying alone. It's dying because a locked door decided I wasn't allowed to leave the relationship. You hear the first sound then, and it's not the building settling. It's too sharp, too immediate. It's a dry, soft sound, like fingernails lightly dragging across sandpaper coming from the other side of the door. You freeze, every single muscle fiber seizing up with an electric jolt of adrenaline. The sound. It wasn't the distant creak of the floorboards above you, or the groan of pipes. It was local. It was at the door. You're lying flat on your back, the blanket suddenly feeling like a crushing weight, and you stare into the absolute blackness of the ceiling. You strain your ears, trying to locate the sound again, trying to categorize it, to label it with something mundane, a mouse, a draft, maybe the door's own wood expanding. But you know that's a lie. The sound was too distinct, too rhythmic to be natural settling. Scratch, scratch. It starts again, a soft, insistent pattern that seems to be circling the door's small, outdated peephole. You remember how dirty that peephole was when you checked it earlier, thick with dust and cobwebs, offering only a distorted yellowish view of the hallway. You immediately regret not cleaning it. Now, that tiny dark lens feels like the iris of an enormous, unseen eye. You force yourself to sit up, the movement of your sheets a small riot of noise in the silence. You're hyperventilating a little now, breathing in rapid, shallow gasps. You instinctively reach for your phone, lying heavy and cool next to your mattress. But what are you going to do? Call the police. Yes, officer, my door is lightly scratching itself. You decide on an insane experiment. You hold your breath. The silence that follows your final exhale is profound, almost painful. It's the kind of silence that doesn't exist naturally, the silence of a vacuum. And then the response: scratch, 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 pause, scratch. It's almost as if the entity on the other side heard your breathing stop and paused to confirm the resulting silence before continuing its work. It's no longer a random sound, it's a deliberate communication of presence. It knows you are there, and it knows you are listening. It's like being caught looking in the rearview mirror by the driver behind you, except the driver behind you is not driving. They are standing completely still in the dark hallway, and they are using their fingernails to communicate with the wood. This is the exact feeling that drives certain urban legends. Think of the chilling story of the Watcher House in New Jersey, a perfectly normal suburban home that became uninhabitable after the residents received terrifying, anonymous letters from someone claiming to be watching their every move. The horror isn't the physical threat, but the absolute crushing erosion of privacy and security in one's own space. You feel that erosion now, acutely. Your door is no longer a barrier, it's a membrane. You need a drink of water. You need to move. You swing your legs off the mattress and plant your feet on the hardwood floor. It's cold. You take one silent, excruciatingly slow step toward the door. Your heart is hammering against your ribs, a loud, frantic drummer in a silent concert hall. The scratching stops abruptly. You stand there, a statue in the dark. Your skin feels tight, pulled across your bones. You wait, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. The silence is a physical wait again. And then, almost too soft to hear, you catch the barest hint of a sound, a faint, metallic shift. Not a key turning, but something moving against the metal of the deadbolt on the exterior. The obscurity of this kind of haunting is what gets under your skin. You've read about the stone tape theory, an obscure fringe tidbit that suggests the inorganic materials of a building, like the wood and stone of this old apartment, can act like magnetic tape, recording and playing back emotional or traumatic energy rather than the place being haunted by a sentient ghost. Maybe that's what this is. A playback loop of some historical dread that the previous tenant felt, or perhaps the final, futile scratching of someone trapped inside before you. Researchers disagree on whether electromagnetic anomalies recorded at haunted sites are remnants of deceased consciousness or simply misinterpretations of natural geological and electrical phenomena. You don't care about the academic debate right now. You care about what's pressing itself against your door. You try to use the logical part of your brain to tell yourself that you're just dealing with a structural issue, but the pause after you held your breath ruins the whole theory. The pause was intelligent. You remember the landlord's dismissive attitude. It occurs to you that you might be dealing with a structural issue, a bizarre settling of the building that causes the sound. You try to tell yourself that, but the pause after you held your breath ruins the whole theory. The pause was intelligent. You remember the landlord's dismissive attitude. It occurs to you that you might be dealing with a structural issue, a bizarre settling of the building that causes the sound. You try to tell yourself that, but the pause after you held your breath ruins the whole theory. The pause was intelligent. You remember the landlord's dismissive attitude. It occurs to you that you might be dealing with a structural issue, a bizarre settling of the building that causes the sound. You try to tell yourself that, but the pause after you held your breath ruins the whole theory. The pause was intelligent. Your need for a mental escape mechanism kicks in, the kind of gallows humor that keeps people sane in the trenches. You think, my doctor told me I need to reduce my stress, so I've decided to stop trying to understand why a noise outside my door knows when I'm breathing. That seems like a good start. You finally reach out and slap the door sharply with the palm of your hand, a sudden, aggressive gesture. Thack. The sound is massive. It echoes down the hallway outside and reverberates back through your small unit. The silence afterward is absolute. Nothing. No scratching, no metallic shift. You feel a brief, almost euphoric sense of victory. You've scared it off. You, the new tenant, have asserted dominance over the scratch and menace. You stand there, heart slowing slightly, leaning against the door for a moment, letting the coolness of the woods soak through your thin t-shirt. I tried to use humor to diffuse the situation, you think, but the door looked at me and said, "You can't spell massacre without mass, and that's a very masculine threat." Now I'm just confused. You walk back toward the mattress, feeling marginally better. You'll deal with the landlord in the morning. You'll demand to know who has a key to that outside deadbolt and why you don't have one. You'll threaten to withhold rent. You will be a terrible tenant. You stop by the kitchen sink and pour yourself a glass of water, your hands shaking slightly. You notice a small, faint indentation in the paint next to the door frame, at about the height of your shoulder. It's barely perceptible, but it looks like a slight gouge, not from a key, but something more blunt, or perhaps something repeatedly dragged. You touch it. It's slick with old dust. You laugh again, that dry, humorless laugh. "I went to a seance the other night," you muse. "The medium tried to contact my dead relatives, but all they could hear was the scraping sound of my landlord filing for eviction papers." You toss back the water, the cold liquid a temporary anesthetic for the buzzing fear. You climb back into bed, pulling the sheets up to your chin. The adrenaline is fading now, leaving behind a nasty tremor and a deep, crushing exhaustion. You know you won't sleep, but you lie there anyway. The stillness returns, but now it's an aggressive stillness, a stillness that is listening. And then you remember the most chilling thing about the door. You can only lock it from the outside. You are vulnerable to the whims of the thing that just stopped scratching. The morning light, when it finally arrives, feels less like a comfort and more like a flimsy disguise. You haven't slept, of course. You've been staring at the deadbolt, the twist knob that is the only thing standing between you and the eerie quiet of the hallway. The scratching is gone, replaced by the mundane sounds of the city waking up. A distant siren, the rumble of a bus, the neighbor's morning cough. But the silence of the night and the pause in the scratching when you stopped breathing is still a weight in your chest. You get up, the exhaustion making your movements slow and deliberate, like wading through thick water. The first thing you do is call the landlord. You bypass the complex, professional phrasing you rehearsed in the dark and just say it flat out. "The deadbolt on Unit 3B, you say, your voice rough from disuse. It only has a keyhole on the outside. I cannot engage it from the inside. I need to know why, and I need the mechanism replaced immediately." There's a long, thick silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that suggests a person has been caught doing something they shouldn't. Then a low chuckle. It's the landlord, Mr. Thorne, and his voice is gravelly, like dry leaves being crushed. "Ah, the external sentinel, you mean," he says, his tone dismissive and far too cheerful for 8030 a.m. "Yes, that old thing. It's an antique. A little quirk of the building. It's been there forever." "A quirk, a quirk," you repeat, trying to keep the hysteria out of your voice. "Mr. PBO Ching Beal Fashion." "Thorne, it's a security flaw. If I'm inside, I can't secure the heaviest lock. That means anyone with a key can lock me in without me knowing. Or, more relevantly, I feel unsafe knowing the primary lock is completely out of my control." You have the inner twist knob. Perfectly fine. That deadbolt, it's for when you leave the premises. Keeps the place nice and tight. We've never had an issue. Besides, you have the key, don't you? This is the central point of anxiety, and he's dancing around it like a particularly irritating fly. You tell him, "My key works the inner knob, yes, but I don't have a key to operate that external deadbolt from the hallway. I only have one key. And I can't even tell if the bolt is currently engaged since I can't see the hole." Another chuckle, this one colder. "Oh, the other key. Well, that's just a master. Stays with me naturally, for emergencies, you know, or when a tenant forgets to leave the door properly secured." He pauses, and the cheerfulness drains from his voice, replaced by a cold, almost predatory curiosity. "Tell me though," he says, leaning into the mic on his end, "when you sleep. Are you a light sleeper? Do you find yourself staying up late? I only ask because, noise ordinances. Some of the walls are a little thin, especially near the main stairwell." You feel a profound sense of violation, as if he's peering through the deadbolt's keyhole right now. He's asking about your sleeping habits, a completely irrelevant detail for a security inquiry. You know that kind of intrusive focus is often a hallmark of certain historical criminals. For instance, historians still argue whether H.H. Holmes's intricate murder castle in Chicago was primarily a functioning hotel with deadly modifications or a purpose-built torture chamber disguised as a business. But the core horror remains the same: the deliberate manipulation of domestic space to track and isolate victims. Thorne's probing feels like a psychological prelude to that kind of isolation. You quickly deflect. "I'm an excellent sleeper, Mr. Thorne. I need that lock replaced by tomorrow, or I will be calling city inspectors." He sighs, a sound of heavily put-upon bureaucracy. Fine. I'll look into scheduling a hardware replacement. But it'll take weeks, specialized parts for that old thing. In the meantime, just use the knob. And maybe keep your movements to a minimum near the door at night, just a suggestion. He hangs up before you can respond, leaving you staring at your phone, the cold dial tone buzzing faintly in your ear. Keep your movements to a minimum. The phrase hangs in the air, heavy and rank. Was that a threat, a warning, or a simple instruction? You walk back to the door. The tiny gouge you noticed earlier seems darker now, more pronounced. You can't shake the feeling that Mr. Thorne knows exactly why that lock is there, and who, or what, has the key to the master deadbolt. You try to lighten the mood with a bit of dark gallows humor, but even the jokes feel like half-hearted screams. "I tried to tell my landlord I was trapped inside," you think. He said, "Great, you're paying rent while doing less damage. That's a win-win in my book." The thought of his oily curiosity about your sleep reminds you of an obscure or fringe tidbit about doors in European folklore, specifically the idea of the threshold spirit. This lore suggests that the threshold of a home is a delicate, liminal space guarded by a minor spirit. If you disrupt the spirit's peace, say, by bringing in a lot of negative energy, or perhaps by simply listening too intently, it can allow or invite malicious outside forces across the boundary. By challenging the door's design, you haven't just irritated a landlord, you've annoyed an ancient protective spirit that might now be working against you. This, of course, is ridiculous, but the absurdity is a thin blanket against the cold terror. You spend the next few hours pacing the apartment trying to unpack, but you keep finding yourself drawn back to the door. You wipe the dusty peephole, and for the first time you peer through it. The view is still warped, but you can clearly see the hallway. It's empty, silent. Just the yellow fluorescent light humming faintly, casting long, dusty shadows. You press your eye tight against the glass, making sure you see every detail. Nothing. You step back, and a third deeply unsettling joke comes to mind. My biggest fear isn't dying alone. It's dying because a locked door decided I wasn't allowed to leave the relationship. The more you try to rationalize the lock as a simple architectural mistake, the more you realize it's a deliberate instrument of control. It creates a power imbalance where your security is contingent upon the good faith of someone who has already proven to be manipulative and evasive. You are physically inside a space that, architecturally, assumes you will always be leaving it, never just staying in it. It assumes you will lock the door behind you on your way out, not on your way in. That inversion of safety protocol is the most terrifying part of all. You feel trapped not by a physical wall, but by a psychological expectation built into the very hardware. You decide the only way to gain some control back is to understand the mechanism completely. You need to know if the outside key is turning the tumbler in a standard, predictable way. You need to know if it can be picked or bypassed. You need to know if your physical presence on the inside can somehow, impossibly, lock the exterior deadbolt, effectively reversing the horrifying function. This means you have to interact with the door again, not defensively, but analytically. You have to become the researcher, and the door is your subject. The landlord's oily denial and the strange, probing questions about your sleep only fuel your need for real answers. You realize the one place a slippery landlord can't lie is the digital record. You drag your laptop over to the mattress, the faint light of the screen casting a pale, sickly glow on your face in the dim apartment. Your fingers fly across the keys, not typing the address of a locksmith, but the complex history of the building itself. You search for the address, the property owner's name, and anything relating to Unit 3B, lock anomaly. The search terms are initially useless, just property listings and zoning records. But then you drill down into local history forums, the dark, dusty corners of the internet where neighborhood legends and forgotten tragedies are kept alive by anonymous enthusiasts. That's where you find it. A thread, 7 years old, titled "The Dread Door on Elm Street." The thread mentions your building not by its official name but by a nickname, the Locksmith's Lament. And there, buried deep in the comments, is a local fringe legend that chills you to the bone. It describes previous tenants of Unit 3B who didn't exactly move out, they just vanished. Not all at once, but one by one, over the course of decades. The constant through line in these fringe accounts is the door, a superstition that the door was not built to protect the occupant from the outside world, but to protect the outside world from the occupant. Or, more chillingly, that the door itself was sentient and wanted to be closed, actively selecting and isolating tenants who exhibited certain characteristics, perhaps, like, say, being too nosy or too persistent. The details are vague, fragmented accounts of neighbors hearing muffled screams, seeing a shadowy figure slipping a key into the exterior deadbolt at 3 a.m., and then silence. Always followed by a new coat of institutional green paint on the door and a for rent sign. The collective trauma this building holds reminds you of a historical case like the Villisca Axe murders of 1912, where an entire family and their guests were brutally murdered in a quiet Iowa town, a case that remains officially unsolved. The sheer brutality and the fact that the killer was never caught created a psychological horror that permeated the town's very fabric, proving that a feeling of violation and the sudden, inexplicable loss of multiple people can turn a home into a permanent, chilling landmark. Your apartment feels imbued with a similar, suffocating history of unresolved terror. You lean back, rubbing your temples. A sentient door, a locksmith's lament. The absurdity of the lore should make you laugh, but it only reinforces the unease. The scratching you heard last night wasn't a mouse. It was the door's own physical groan of hunger, or perhaps the residual memory of a frantic, trapped person on the other side. You remember the landlord asking about your sleep, and the pieces click into place. He's not trying to keep you quiet. He's trying to gauge your level of isolation and vulnerability. If you're a heavy sleeper, you're easier to lock in permanently. If you keep late hours, you're harder to surprise. You need a joke, a mental lifeline to pull you out of the rapidly filling water of panic. I tried to explain the concept of work-life balance to my door, you think dryly. It just slammed shut and told me its only job was making sure I never saw the sun again. Very dedicated. The fringe tidbit from the forums is about whispering wood, a European architectural superstition that the wood used in certain old doors and floorboards retains the capacity to whisper the names of those who die near it, specifically those who die in despair. They claim that the reason the landlord paints the door so often is to silence the residual voices leaking through the layers of paint. You look at the door now. The light is catching on the institutional green paint, and for the first time, you notice the grain of the wood. It's heavy old oak, dense and dark. You imagine dozens of frantic fingernails and keys scraping at it over the decades. You find another dark joke. I asked the maintenance guy why the door keeps moving on its own. He said, "Oh, that's just Jim. He lost his keys in 1987 and still hasn't accepted it." The scholarly angle arrives unbidden. Researchers disagree on whether the transmission of folklore and urban legends is a purely oral and written tradition, or if specific, high-stress environments, like this apartment building, somehow generate or facilitate the psychological belief in such stories by priming the occupant's paranoia. You feel your paranoia being primed right now, your mind actively manufacturing details to fit the dread-filled narrative. You get up, the mattress springs groaning under your weight, and you walk straight to the door. You look at the exterior deadbolt hole again. You know you have to touch it. You can't just rely on shadowy forum posts. You have to prove, scientifically, that the locking function is impossible from the inside. You press your finger against the smooth, cold brass. You imagine the key sliding in. You think about the rhythmic scratching you heard. What was it doing? Was it trying to talk? Was it trying to get in? Or was it trying to keep you in? A final joke, aimed squarely at your own bad decision-making. Moving to a haunted apartment is fine. You save money on security systems. The ghost is the security system, and its motto is, "You're not leaving, but neither is anyone else." Except for the key, that is. The anxiety is too much to bear while pacing. You need action. You know what you have to do next, the one thing Mr. Mind Thorne expressly warned you against. You have to try and replicate the lock's function from the inside. It's the only way to know the true extent of your danger. You must become the lock. The The chilling realization from the online forums that the door wants to be closed has injected a frantic energy into your movements. You know you can't just stand there and be a victim to an antique superstition. You have to test the mechanics of the horror. You stand facing the door, ready to execute your terrifying experiment. You need to simulate the turning of the key in the exterior deadbolt keyhole from the inside, a feat of impossible geometry. You study the inside of the door, the simple, flimsy twist knob for the latch, and the heavy wood surrounding the absence of the deadbolt's interior mechanism. You grab a thin metal skewer from the kitchen, the longest, stiffest object you can find. This is where the physics of the nightmare must meet the cold reality of hardware. You carefully, agonizingly slowly, slide the skewer into the small gap between the door and the frame, near the height of the deadbolt. You are aiming for the bolt mechanism itself, trying to reach the brass housing where the locking tumbler resides. Your hands are slick with sweat, making the skewer wobble precariously. You are trying to engage a locking mechanism that is designed to be pushed out of the door into the frame. For the bolt to engage from the outside, the tumbler is turned, which uses internal leverage to push the bolt forward. You are trying to find the point of leverage from the wrong side. You finally feel the tip of the skewer connect with something solid and metallic inside the door's edge. You gently, almost reverently, apply lateral pressure. Nothing. You try again, pushing harder. A slight clink, the sound of metal scraping metal, but the bolt remains retracted, inert. Then you remember something from the cryptic fringe folklore you read. The door requires a psychological trigger. You close your eyes and focus, imagining the key turning on the outside, picturing the heavy final clunk of the bolt sliding into the jamb. You channel the terror of the previous tenants, the ones who scratched and vanished. You try to project a force of will against the brass. You push the skewer again, this time with a frantic, desperate energy, leveraging it against the wood of the door itself. CLULU. It's faint, but you hear it, you feel it. The entire heavy slab of wood seems to settle into the frame. You pull the skewer back, dropping it with a clatter. It leaves a small, fresh scratch on the green paint of the door, joining the faint gouge already there. You tentatively push against the door. It doesn't budge. You try the twist knob. It's loose and rattling. It's definitely not holding the door. You push again, a hard, frustrated shove. The door holds solid. The exterior deadbolt is engaged. You look at the retracted latch lock. The bolt is still in. You cannot believe it. You, standing inside the apartment, have somehow engaged the heavy external deadbolt. The only conclusion is that the mechanism is not purely mechanical. It is responding to a very specific vibration or a subtle structural shift that you, by interacting with it so aggressively, manage to reproduce. Or perhaps, and this is the truly chilling possibility, the door wants you to know you are not in control. The thought is as stark and cold as a police report. You are reminded of the classic, terrifying, unsolved case of the Black Dahlia, where the sheer theatricality of the crime scene suggested a killer who was not just violent, but psychologically manipulative. This door is not just flawed, it is performing, using its impossible function to terrorize you, the occupant. You try to undo it. You slide the skewer back in, aiming for the mechanism again, trying to replicate the motion you think would retract the bolt. You try turning the skewer, wiggling it, pulling up, pushing down. Nothing. The bolt remains solidly engaged. You are trapped. A bead of cold sweat drips down your temple. This is a very specific type of horror, the kind that invites dark humor as a coping mechanism. I used to worry about the apartment building having too many stairs. Now I realize my landlord's real trick was giving me an escape plan that requires a master's degree in lockpicking and a complete disregard for self-preservation. You work on the lock for almost half an hour, your frantic efforts yielding nothing but more scraping noises and the dull, mocking silence of the deadbolt. Finally, in a fit of exhausted rage, you kick the bottom of the door, a hard, purely emotional contact. Whack. And just like that, the door gives a heavy, metallic shudder, and the heavy clunk of the deadbolt retracting echoes through the apartment. You push the door, and it swings slightly inward. You are free. Or rather, you are unlocked. Researchers disagree on whether the perception of coincidence, such as the bolt retracting after an emotional outburst, is evidence of localized psychokinetic energy, or simply the brain's attempt to impose meaning on random mechanical failure. For you, the answer is clear. The door is responding to your terror and frustration. It is playing with you. You need a breath of fresh air. You open the door wide, peering out into the hallway, still empty. You step out onto the landing, close the door behind you, and use your own key to secure the regular twist knob. Then, you look at the external deadbolt keyhole. It's just an empty brass slot, mocking your efforts. You realize this calls for another highly specialized joke. My apartment is so secure, even the demons have trouble getting in. They just stand outside the deadbolt and whisper, "Hey, can you just let yourself out? We're not paid enough for this kind of structural ambiguity." You step back inside, the sense of dread reclamping around your heart. You feel like you've just proven that you can be controlled, and you've given the door the exact psychological data it needed to refine its methods. You look at the dark gouge in the door you made, the new one, and you realize you have to pay closer attention to the next sound you hear. The next sound won't be random. You're sitting against the far wall now, as far from the door as the apartment allows, armed with nothing but a notepad and a pen. You are exhausted, but the adrenaline keeps you wired, your mind buzzing with the impossible mechanics of the deadbolt. You proved that it can be engaged and disengaged by sheer desperate interaction, which only confirms that its function is psychological, not just mechanical. The light outside is fading again, bleeding from a sickly orange to a bruised purple. You know the dark is coming, and with it, the scratching. You are prepared this time to record it, to treat it as data, not just as a terrifying noise. And just as the first shadow creeps across the floor, it begins. But this time, it's different. The rhythmic, soft drag of fingernails on the painted wood is gone. This is harder. It's the sharp, rasping sound of a metal point against dry, dense wood. It's not just scratching, it's carving. It's the sound of information being delivered, painstakingly, one scrape at a time. You grip the pen tighter. You close your eyes, focusing completely on the auditory data. Scrape, pause. It's Morse, or maybe something simpler, more primitive. You immediately jump up, quietly, and rush to the door, placing your ear against the cool surface. The noise is louder now, almost directly next to your ear. It's a dry, grating sound that vibrates the wood, suggesting the point of contact is incredibly fine and focused. You are reminded of the terrifying history of coffin birth or post-mortem fetal extrusion, a documented, though rare, historical phenomenon where gas is built up during the decomposition of a pregnant woman's body, force a deceased fetus out of the body. The horror of this fact is the quiet, automatic nature of it, a terrible process continuing long after life is stopped. The door's carving feels the same way, a persistent, automatic, and inevitable delivery of information regardless of whether you want to receive it. You start documenting the pattern on your notepad. You draw a dash for a long scrape and a dot for a short one, marking the pauses. Dash, pause, dash dot, pause, dot, dash. It's tedious, frustrating work. Every time you think you've got a handle on the pattern, the rhythm shifts. Sometimes the pauses are longer, sometimes the strokes are deeper, resulting in a slightly higher pitch of scraping. It's as if the entity outside is growing impatient with your learning curve, or maybe it's adjusting its communication style based on your proximity. You whisper a darkly humorous joke to yourself, a nervous, silent laugh into your shoulder. I told my therapist I was communicating with a sentient door through rhythmic scratching. He said, "At least you're trying to form a relationship, but maybe stick to dating apps first." You continue for what must be hours, until the wood must be showing a deep, agonizing scar on the outside. You are creating the evidence of your own haunting. You look at the pattern on your pad, a jumble of dots and dashes. You realize that you're not trying to decipher Morse code, but rather a simple, repetitive set of symbols. You feel a sudden, intuitive understanding. It's not a language, it's a diagram. You remember a piece of fringe horror tidbit you once encountered about bibliomancy, the practice of using random book passages to gain spiritual insight. While this carving isn't a book, the need to interpret random physical information as a spiritual guide is the same. The door is forcing you into divination. You get another dark joke, fueled by sheer manic frustration. I asked the door if it was trying to tell me something important. It scraped out, "Yes, your car warranty is about to expire." The horror is multi-layered. You look at the pattern again. Dot, dash, dash, dot, dot, dash. It is a series of 4 distinct sequences. You realize the length of the pause is the key. The entity outside is segmenting the message. The scholarly phrasing arrives as you struggle to make sense of the geometry. Researchers disagree on whether nonverbal communication patterns, even those originating from non-human sources, must adhere to human-recognizable syntactic rules to be classified as language, or if the intent alone defines the communication. Right now, the intent feels crystal clear: isolation. You sit back down, the paper covered in your frantic markings. The silence is back, the carving finished. The entity is waiting. You hold the paper up to the dim light. The markings, now that the sound has stopped, look like nothing. Just a child's scribble of dots and lines. But you know better. You know that carved into the opposite face of this solid green door is a message meant only for you, delivered by the thing that has the master key to your sanctuary. You try to find a final piece of humor, something to break the tension of the impending translation. My apartment is so small, I've had to start communicating with the door just to have a conversation. It's really quiet though. It keeps saying, "Don't open." I think it's shy. You know you have to translate the carving, but you also know what the next logical step is for the entity that just delivered a chilling message. It's going to wait for your reaction. And your reaction will be fueled by the next terrible discovery. A discovery born of your sheer, crushing exhaustion. The door is playing the long game, and you are starting to crumble. The exhaustion is a physical weight now, thick and debilitating. You haven't slept, not truly. You've been operating on fumes, with adrenaline acting as a temporary, corrosive substitute for rest. The cycle of intense fear, frantic analysis, and then the return of the ominous silence is wearing you down, grinding away at the edges of your perception. The constant tension, the need to listen for the next scrape or the next CLU wunk of the deadbolt has made you brittle. You find yourself doing things that don't make sense. You catch yourself staring blankly at the institutional green door for 10 minutes, watching the way the dim light catches the subtle gouges, the tiny physical scars of the entity's communication. You try to translate the scrape pattern again, but the letters blur. You look at your notebook and see your own writing starting to tilt at a strange, aggressive angle. The world outside the apartment is beginning to feel distant, a muffled, garbled reality. The line between your anxious reality and terrifying, short-lived nightmares is not just blurring, it's dissolving entirely. You're experiencing microsleeps, tiny, involuntary moments of slumber that last only a few seconds. But in those few seconds, your brain unleashes pure, concentrated terror. One moment, you are standing by the sink, splashing cold water on your face. The next, you are jolting awake, the faucet still running, with the visceral image of a pair of long, pale fingers gently inserting themselves through the deadbolt keyhole, flexing slowly, like a spider's legs. The image is so real, so immediate, that you jump back and hit the wall. The dull impact, a much-needed confirmation of solid, physical reality. This state of acute sleep deprivation reminds you of a dark historical fact: the widespread use of lobotomy in the mid-20th century. This procedure was often used to calm patients by surgically severing connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex, essentially flattening their emotional and cognitive responses. The true horror isn't the surgery itself, but the medical community's desperate, misguided belief that total emotional detachment was a valid cure for mental distress. Your door, by denying you sleep, is performing a kind of psychological lobotomy, cutting you off from rational thought and emotional regulation, leaving you raw and vulnerable. You try to make a joke, to summon the dry wit that usually keeps you afloat, but it comes out as a harsh, strained whisper. I asked the shadow person I saw during my last microsleep if I looked tired. He said, "Tired? Honey, you look like a concept album about existential dread." And your key is still on the floor. The short, intense nightmares are becoming more specific. They aren't just shadows, they are familiar faces. The watery eyes of the landlord, Mr. Thorne, looking at you with a slow, satisfied smile, holding the single, heavy brass key in his palm. Or the face of that strange, silent neighbor you haven't even officially met yet, whose presence you only infer from the sound of their door closing. You encounter an obscure or fringe horror tidbit from folklore about sleep deprivation, the belief that shadow people or similar entities like the Fae are drawn to extreme human exhaustion. They feed on the confused, disorganized mental energy, finding the human mind easiest to manipulate when it's running on empty. According to the lore, the only way to banish them is through loud, rhythmic noise, but you can't make loud noise because the door is listening and you're afraid of what it will do when provoked. You stumble over to the couch, clutching your notepad. The scribbled pattern of the scraping still mocks you. You try to translate it using a standard cipher, running through every logical sequence your mind can grasp. A1, B2, Caesar, Visionaire. Nothing yields a clear phrase. It's too chaotic, yet too deliberate. Researchers disagree on whether sleep deprivation causes hallucinations by flooding the brain with disorganized sensory data, or if it merely lowers the brain's filter, allowing subconscious fears and latent supernatural perceptions to surface. You can't tell if the shadowy figure you just saw in the corner of your eye was your brain betraying you or the Fae taking their cut. You decide to try one more darkly humorous joke, but the punchline is lost in a wave of shivering anxiety. My landlord called. I told him, "I think I'm seeing things." He said, "Oh, that's just the previous tenant's security deposit floating around like a lost soul. Happens all the time." The profound effect of the exhaustion is how fragile your decision-making has become. Every small task feels monumental. You desperately want to pack and leave, but the thought of moving the boxes, of calling a cab, of interacting with the outside world feels too complex, too demanding. The apartment is holding you captive with inertia and fatigue. You realize the door has won this round. It's isolated you, worn you down, and made your perception unreliable. You lean back against the wall, allowing yourself to succumb to the heavy, sinking feeling. You're too tired to fight, too tired to flee. But in that brief moment of surrender, a new thought, sharp and clear despite the haze, cuts through the fatigue. It's a physical detail you missed in your frantic early investigation, a flaw that is critical to the door's power dynamic. You suddenly remember the key, your key. You rush to the tiny table where you threw them. The thought that slices through the exhaustion is sharp and terrifying, the kind of clarity that only extreme fear can grant. You remember the landlord's casual dismissal. You have the inner twist knob, perfectly fine, and your own key, the heavy brass thing you tossed on the rickety table, which you assumed did everything. You stumble over to the table, pick up the key, and walk back to the door. You insert the key into the twist knob lock, the one that controls the latch and has the small tumbler inside the door. You turn the key. The latch bolt retracts, and the twist knob engages, locking the door firmly. Standard. You unlock it. Standard. Then you look at the key itself. It's a single-cut key, simple, basic, designed to operate the latch and its interior lock. Now, you hold it up to the exterior deadbolt keyhole, the one that stares out into the dark hallway. You try to insert it. It doesn't fit. The keyhole for the exterior deadbolt is clearly designed for a multi-cut, intricate master key. Your key, the one that unlocks the apartment for you, is too simple, too smooth, the wrong shape. The realization hits you with the force of a physical blow. You do not have a key for the heavy, intimidating deadbolt. Your key only operates the interior lock, the flimsy little thing the landlord dismissed. This is not a mistake. This is not a quirk of an old building. This is deliberate design. The previous tenants, the ones who vanished, were equipped with the same psychological trap. They were given a key that seemed to offer security, but which was functionally useless against the primary barrier, the deadbolt. You think of famous historical crimes that relied on this kind of subtle, slow-acting treachery. The history of arsenic poisoning, for example, which was once virtually undetectable and could be administered slowly, masquerading as a lingering illness until it was too late. This door is your arsenic, a slow, daily dose of psychological poison administered by an invisible key. You look at your key, now inert and useless in your hand. This changes everything. The mystery isn't who has the external key. The mystery is why your key exists at all. It's a placebo, a psychological barrier against your own panic. You need a dark laugh now, more than ever. I bought a cheap house key on the internet, you mused to the empty room. Turns out it was only the key to my eventual mental breakdown. Great purchase, though. Highly recommend the existential dread. You frantically start searching the sparse belongings you brought in, looking for a second key, a spare key, anything. You tear through the pockets of the jacket you wore yesterday, dig through your travel bag. Nothing, just the single, useless latch key. The obscure or fringe horror tidbit you remember now is the superstition of leaving doors slightly ajar when you sleep in a new or strange place. The idea is that a door that is not fully closed cannot be fully locked, thus preventing entrapment by malicious spirits or entities. You failed to follow this ancient, simple piece of advice. You closed the door firmly, and now you are subject to the will of the master key. The scholarly phrasing emerges from the depth of your paranoia. Researchers disagree on whether the perception of control, even illusory control, such as believing you hold the key to a major lock, is a necessary psychological defense mechanism against learned helplessness, or if it simply delays the inevitable acceptance of powerlessness. You realize the landlord, Mr. Thorne, engineered your learned helplessness by giving you the wrong key. You walk back to the door, the flimsy key in your hand feeling like a feather. You examine the deadbolt hole again. You imagine Thorne's master key, silver and intricate, sliding in, the brass tumblers clicking into place with a slow, grinding sound. You think of another piece of dry, macabre humor. My biggest fear is that I'll be locked in here, and the entity outside will just slide the pizza delivery menu under the door. I hate that pepperoni place. The exhaustion, combined with this new terrifying knowledge, makes you feel exposed, completely naked to the outside world. The door is not only designed to be locked from the outside, it is designed to be locked by someone who is not you. You lean your head against the cool wood, listening again. Still silent. But the silence feels like a loaded spring, ready to snap. The scratching entity is waiting for you to realize its full advantage. You manage one final, strained joke. I thought about calling the fire department, but then I remembered the local fire department slogan, "We'll get you out," unless your entrapment is purely symbolic, in which case, enjoy the psychological terror. You pull away from the door, wiping a fresh layer of sweat from your forehead. Your eyes dart to the peephole. You remember the warped, yellowish view. You need to know if anyone is out there, if the key is already hovering. And that's when you hear it, not a key, not a scrape, but a sound that implies a human presence in the hallway, an interaction with a door down the hall, a quiet, heavy THU of a neighbor's door closing. The presence of other people in the building is usually a comfort, but now it just introduces a new, terrifying variable. The sound of the neighbor's door, that soft, heavy THUD down the hall, doesn't comfort you. It makes the threat feel localized, human. It confirms that the hallway is not an empty vacuum, but a corridor potentially occupied by an accomplice. You feel the crushing need for information, an overwhelming desire to put a face to the fear. You force yourself out of the apartment. You turn the twist knob, listening to the flimsy lock engage, and step out onto the landing. The fluorescent light is humming its low, sickly note. The hallway is empty, but the scent of stale cigarette smoke and something metallic and sharp lingers in the air. A scent that definitely wasn't there before. You move quietly down the hall, your eyes sweeping the other doors. You stop in front of the door where the sound originated. Unit 3D. It's slightly different from yours. The paint is a faded, dusty beige, and it has a strange little knocker shaped like a tarnished, slightly disturbing gargoyle head. Just as you are about to retreat, the door to 3D opens silently. A figure steps out. It's a man, thin and gaunt, with an air of profound stillness that makes the hair on the back of your neck prickle. He's wearing a thick, oversized wool sweater, even though the air is mild. His face is pale, drawn, and his eyes, small and dark, fix on you with an unnerving, complete lack of expression. You manage a weak, "Hello. I just moved into 3B. He doesn't respond. He doesn't nod or smile. He just looks. His gaze drops from your face to the keys you are still nervously clutching in your hand, and then, slowly, deliberately, to your own door specifically, the exterior deadbolt keyhole. The scrutiny is heavy, almost physical, as if he is mentally calculating the exact torque needed to turn the master key. This sudden encounter, this silent man who seems overly interested in your routine, is chillingly reminiscent of the case of Elisa Lamb and the Cecil Hotel, where the security footage captured unsettling, inexplicable behavior before her tragic disappearance. The horror here lies in the mundane environment being suddenly rendered incomprehensible by a human action that suggests a vast, hidden truth. You try another piece of light conversation. The lock on my door is a bit strange, only key access from the outside. Ever notice that? His voice, when it finally comes, is a dry, barely audible rasp, like the sound of chalk on a slate. The door likes to be closed, he says, his gaze still fixed on your door. It prefers things neat. Things stay where they belong, especially the tenants. He then gives a slight, almost imperceptible nod, steps past you, and begins to descend the main stairwell, his heavy wool sweater seeming to absorb the light as he goes. He doesn't look back. He just vanishes into the gloom of the stairwell, leaving the sharp metallic smell lingering behind. You are left paralyzed, convinced that this silent neighbor is somehow complicit in the door's strangeness. Maybe he's the one with the master key. Maybe he's just the delivery person for the door's isolation ritual. You remember the fringe tidbit about the familiar, the belief that a non-human entity, like a sentient door or spirit, often uses a human accomplice or familiar to perform tasks it cannot physically manage, such as carrying a heavy key or communicating its sinister intentions. This gaunt, silent man is the door's accomplice, its human instrument. You need a joke, a desperate attempt to normalize this terrifying interaction. "I asked my neighbor for a cup of sugar," you whisper, backing slowly toward your door. He stared at me for 30 seconds and then asked, "Is this a metaphor for your inevitable spiritual decay?" I said, "No, I need to bake a cake." You retreat back into your apartment, latching the useless twist knob with a definitive click. You lean against the inside of the door, trembling. The encounter was terrifying not for what he said, but for how little he said. He didn't deny having the key, he just confirmed the door's intent. The scholarly phrasing arrives, mocking your inability to communicate. Historians still argue whether nonverbal cues, such as a specific sustained stare or a sudden change in vocal tone, carry universal meaning, or if their interpretation is entirely context-dependent, making communication inherently unreliable under stress. You know exactly what the stare meant. I know what you're up to, and I approve of what the door is doing to you. You walk back to your notepad, trying to integrate this new, chilling piece of human data into the scrape pattern you recorded. The man's words, "The door likes to be closed, things stay where they belong," sound like the kind of simple, declarative statement you would find in an ancient, terrifying instruction manual. You try another darkly humorous joke to cut the tension. "My neighbor gave me the best advice on moving into this apartment. He said, 'Don't worry about the deadbolt. You won't be here long enough for it to matter.' Such a good neighbor." You realize that by meeting the neighbor, you have made a vital, possibly fatal error. You have confirmed your identity as the new target. You start thinking of the next sound the door will make. Will it be the scraping again? Perhaps a faster, more impatient pattern now that the human element has been introduced? Or will it be the sound of the master key turning slowly, definitively, in the exterior deadbolt hole? Your final piece of gallows humor before the descent. "I told the landlord I was going to call the police about the strange man in the wool sweater. He said, 'Oh, him, that's just the previous tenant. He forgot his key.'" You look at the empty space where the master key belongs, and you know the neighbor is out there. And the only thing between you and him, between you and the cold, unyielding will of the door, is a flimsy, single-throw latch. The neighbor's cold, vacant stare is now a permanent fixture in your mind, replacing the image of the key in the deadbolt. The hallway is quiet again, but the silence is malicious, shared between the door and its accomplice. You feel the weight of their combined presence, and the paranoia shifts from auditory fear to visual violation. You are no longer afraid of a key turning. You are afraid of what they see when they look in, or what they do when they briefly step in. The feeling of being constantly observed intensifies dramatically. You find yourself walking past a mirror and stopping suddenly, convinced you saw a flicker of movement over your shoulder, a phantom shadow that doesn't match your own outline. Every time you turn a corner in the apartment, you glance quickly, expecting to find the wool-sweatered neighbor standing silently in the kitchen. Then the subtle shifts start, minor, almost imperceptible changes that you can't fully dismiss as exhaustion or forgetfulness. You left your laptop charger neatly coiled on the floor. You come back from the bathroom, and it's now stretched out, parallel to the wall, as if someone needed an extra 5 inches of cord for a momentary task. You left a glass of water on the small table. Now, it's exactly 3 inches closer to the edge, a tiny spill ring marking its original spot. You're reminded of the horrifying mystery of the Sodder children's disappearance in 1945, where a family of 10 was engulfed in a house fire. But 5 of the children vanished without a trace, leading to decades of speculation about their fate. The psychological terror of that case lies in the evidence suggesting someone moved them. Someone knew something, and the space was violated and rearranged. Your apartment feels similarly violated, a physical space rearranged to send a message. You start to conduct a silent audit every time you leave the immediate vicinity of a space. You photograph the exact placement of your toothbrush, the angle of the towel hanging on the rack. When you check the photos later, the discrepancies are minimal, almost deniable, but undeniably there. The towel is slightly smoother. The toothbrush handle is pointing in the opposite direction. This implies an occasional brief presence. Someone, the neighbor, maybe Mr. Mame, homodomum, Thorn, or perhaps the entity itself is slipping in while you're asleep, or out of the room for a few minutes to perform these tiny, unsettling acts of rearrangement. They aren't stealing, they aren't vandalizing, they are simply demonstrating access. You manage a dry, darkly humorous joke aimed at your diminishing security. I told my landlady I think someone's been moving my stuff. She said, "Oh, that's just the spirit of minimalist decor. It comes for every tenant eventually. I'm calling it the invisible roommate." The true terror lies in the timing. Are they coming in while you're asleep? Are they watching you sleep? You can't remember if you locked the twist knob when you went down the hall to confront the neighbor. You rush to the door, checking the knob. It's locked. But now you realize that means they were able to pick the flimsy latch lock, slip in, and relock it behind them. Or, far worse, they have a key to the latch lock too, and they've been using it to gain entry. You recall a piece of obscure or fringe horror tidbit about haunting, the superstition that seeing a ghost or a spirit is far worse than just hearing one. Hearing implies a barrier, seeing implies a presence that has crossed the barrier. The shifting objects are visual cues, a physical manifestation of a presence that is breaching your space, making the threat far more immediate than the scratching ever was. The scholarly phrasing cuts through the visual chaos. Researchers disagree on whether the human brain, when under extreme stress, unconsciously orchestrates confirmation bias in environmental observation, leading an individual to perceive neutral events like a cable uncoiling as hostile intent, or if these are legitimate parapsychological phenomena. You look at your phone charger, now stretched straight out, and you know your mind is not inventing this. The hostility is real. You pace the small space, your eyes never settling in one place for more than a second. You feel the crushing need to solve the riddle of the scrape pattern. The shifting objects are an interruption, a demonstration of power designed to distract you from the more important, silent message etched into the wood of the door. You mutter another dark joke, a strained laugh escaping your lips. I left a note on the door that said, "If you're coming in to move my toothbrush, please use the toothpaste too. I'm starting to think you don't care about my dental hygiene." They didn't reply. The ultimate realization is that the apartment is not just haunted, it's being curated. The entity, or the neighbor, is tailoring the experience to maximize your psychological discomfort. You look at the door again, you realize that your escape is not just physical, it's intellectual. You have to outsmart the entity, you have to translate the scraping, a final piece of gallows humor before you dive back into the cipher. I told the landlord I wanted to change the locks. He said, "That's fine, but the new keys will only work on Tuesdays and only if you're wearing polka dots." Also, the master key is tied to my emotional state. You grab your notepad, the one covered in dots and dashes, and you sit down, determined to put a face to the message before the neighbor returns, or before the next object shift signals a more permanent change. The violation of the constantly shifting objects has done its job. It has pushed you past the point of paranoia and into a state of frantic, singular focus. You can't think about the neighbor, or the landlord, or the useless key. You can only think about the scraped message. The entity is demonstrating access, but the message is the entity's intention. You return to the notepad, the sheet covered in the cryptic dots and dashes you transcribed from the metal on wood rasping. You discarded the notion of complex ciphers. This is a primitive mind, or a mind trying to communicate a primitive concept. You look at the four distinct sequences again, separated by long pauses, 1-2-.3.4. You start associating the length of the pauses with word segmentation. It's not a message about escaping. The door would never tell you how to escape. It's a message about staying. You think about the landlord's words. Keep your movements to a minimum. You think about the neighbor's words. The door likes to be closed. And you look at the pattern again. You try the most basic kind of symbolic translation, the way things are represented in digital form. You assign values, dash long, dot stop short. You try to map them to binary, but it yields gibberish. Then you realize the message is simpler. It's architectural. It relates to the door, the space, and the isolation. Sequence 1 dash long, stay. Sequence 2 dash dot long, short, locked. As sequence 3 dot dash short, long, quiet. to sequence 4, dash, dash, dot, long, long, short, listen. You combine them, stay locked, quiet, listen. No, that's too many words. It must be more concise, a simple command. You go back to the single stroke elements. Dash, long, closeus dot short, do dot dash, not. This still feels too complex. You are driven by a need for a simple, chilling instruction. You look at the segments again, focusing on the sheer intent of the scraping. It's an instruction for entrapment. You flip the script. What if the message is directed not at you, but at the door itself? What if you, by recording and focusing on the message, are forcing the entity to define its purpose? The answer hits you, sudden and cold, a moment of sickening clarity. The message is an instruction for the door's accomplice, the neighbor. It's a timetable, a warning, or a preparation. You realize the pattern is simpler than any language. It's numerical. The pause is the segment divider. A-1 stage dash dot dash 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 dot 4. You assign the numbers to the most critical hour of vulnerability, 3 a.m. 3 dot dash dot dash a.m. represented by a long pause, an end of segment marker. This yields nothing. You must accept the initial instinctive chilling translation that fits the neighbor's words and the lock's function, isolate. You look at the pattern for the last time. You combine the simple ideas, dash, the door is closed. The dot, the occupant is here. I dash dot, keep closed here. Dot dash, do not open leave. The decoded message, simple, primitive, and chillingly clear, is still, quiet. Now, this is not a warning, it's an instruction. The entity outside is preparing for the final phase. The scraping was an announcement of intent, forcing you into a state of fearful stillness. This forced isolation reminds you of a dark historical fact, the historical use of quarantine in forced isolation during plague outbreaks. While necessary for public health, the horror of quarantine lay in the absolute separation, the sealing away of the sick until they either died or recovered, with no external comfort or assurance. The door is enforcing a personalized quarantine. You feel a wave of despair. The message means you have to act now. You have to move before the stillness is enforced permanently. You pull out a dark joke to steady your trembling hands. I tried to call the police to report the decoded message, but I realized I couldn't articulate sentient deadbolt communicating a chilling instruction for my isolation in numeric symbolic patterns. They probably would have just sent an EMT with a straitjacket. The scholarly phrasing confirms your panic. Researchers disagree on whether the cognitive process of pattern recognition under threat is an evolutionarily beneficial survival trait, or if it predisposes the subject to overinterpreting random stimuli, leading to heightened anxiety and irrational decision-making. You don't care about the academic debate, the pattern says now. The sheer weight of the impending trap is overwhelming. The door wants you still and quiet. The neighbor is ready to enforce it. You look around the small apartment, your few boxes, your mattress on the floor. You don't care about the security deposit. You don't care about the rent. You just need to flee. You try a final, desperate joke aimed at the door. I told the door, I'm leaving. I'm going to a nicer apartment with more natural light and fewer human accomplices. The door just scraped out. You have terrible taste in architecture. Your plan is simple and reckless. Grab the essentials and run. Run for the outside world before the stillness is permanently enforced. The decoded message, still, quiet, now, has ripped away the last remnants of your sanity. The puzzle is solved, and the solution is terrifyingly simple. The entity is ready to act. The time for analysis is over. The time for flight is now. You move with a desperate, frantic energy and adrenaline-fueled chaos. You don't bother with the boxes. You don't care about the clothes you just unpacked or the deposit you paid. All of it is collateral damage in this psychological war. You are abandoning the apartment, surrendering the physical space to the deadbolt and its silent accomplice. You grab a backpack, the biggest one you can find, and begin stuffing the absolute necessities into it. Phone, wallet, keys, the useless one, but still a comfort, and your notepad with the sinister scraped message. The frantic pace is a psychological bomb, a way to channel the suffocating terror into physical action. As you move through the apartment, you can't shake the feeling that the door is watching you, listening to the hasty zip of the bag, the rustle of clothing. You keep glancing back at the institutional green slab, half expecting to see the twist knob slowly, manually turning, a visual confirmation of the entity's impatience. The absolute cold horror of abandoning your home reminds you of a historical crime fact, the actions of the infamous Burke and Hare in Edinburgh, who sold fresh corpses to anatomists in the early 19th century. The horror wasn't just the murder, but the realization that the line between a living person and a disposable piece of property for profit was thin and easily crossed. You feel like that piece of property now. Your safety is disposable, and your presence is a resource to be controlled. You are moving like a hunted animal, avoiding the windows, convinced the neighbor is watching from his Unit 3D, waiting for the signal that you are close to the door, close to the moment of maximum vulnerability. You are about to run, to sprint down the hallway and down the stairs, abandoning the psychological trap for the sanctuary of the busy street outside. You need a darkly humorous joke to punctuate this frantic escape, a final, despairing piece of wit. I decided to pack light, you think, zipping up the bag, since my final destination is probably just a shallow grave dug by a confused, wool-sweatered amateur. The feeling of overwhelming panic makes you recall an obscure or fringe horror tidbit known as the call of the void, l'appel du vide. This is the inexplicable momentary urge to step off a high ledge or swerve a car into oncoming traffic. It's an urge for self-destruction, and right now, your flight feels like a response to that urge, a desperate need to break the tension by any means necessary, even if it means running directly into another, unknown danger. You throw the backpack onto your shoulders. You've done it. You're ready to go. You take one last, long look around the tiny, cursed apartment, the messy mattress, the half-unpacked box, the desk pushed against the wall. It's all going to stay here. It's all going to be given to the door. The scholarly phrasing arrives even now, in the moment of your flight. Researchers disagree on whether the fight or flight response is a rational evolutionary mechanism, or if extreme psychological stress can trigger an impulsive flight response, but is ultimately maladaptive and exposes the individual to greater harm. You don't know if you're being rational or impulsive. You just know that still, quiet, now means the door is about to close forever. You turn your back on the apartment and take the first step toward the door. You reach out your hand for the latch, preparing to turn the knob, to burst out into the hallway and run. You take a deep, shuddering breath, filling your lungs with the stale, refrigerated air of the small unit. A second darkly humorous joke comes to mind. As a last attempt to feel human, I'm not worried about my landlord keeping my security deposit. I'm worried about him using it to buy a heavier, more sentient deadbolt for the next tenant. Your hand closes around the cool brass of the twist knob. You feel the faint give of the mechanism, the small mechanical slack before the lock is engaged. You turn, and then, just as the latch begins to retract, you hear it. It's not a scrape, it's not a whisper, it's a sound of finality, a heavy, definite clunk from the exterior. Not the soft click of the latch lock, but the deep, metal-on-metal thud of the exterior deadbolt engaging. The sound resonates through the wood, through the brass knob in your hand, through your very bones. You pull the door towards you, and it doesn't budge. You are trapped. A final, desperate piece of gallows humor. I'm always leaving the keys inside my apartment. This time, I'm just leaving my entire person inside. Problem solved. The door is locked, and the key is on the outside. The heavy, final clunk of the exterior deadbolt engaging is the sound of the world ending. It's absolute. It's final. The sound vibrates in your fingertips, cold and undeniable. You pull on the door, shove at it, rattle the twist knob, all pointless, all futile. The flimsy latch lock is meaningless now. The deadbolt, the external sentinel that Mr. Thorne spoke of, is engaged, and the lock is holding. You are pinned down, trapped inside by a key you don't possess, wielded by a person or thing you don't understand. You are no longer fighting the apartment. You are confronting the door's intention face to face. The frantic energy of your attempted escape immediately collapses into a devastating cold sweat paralysis. You slide down the institutional green wood, your back pressing against the unyielding barrier, the backpack sliding off your shoulders. You are a rat in a box, and the lid has just been sealed. This feeling of entrapment is the core of so many deep-seated fears. You are reminded of the infamous escapes from Alcatraz, the legendary prison island. The prisoners who tried to escape were not only fighting bars and locks, they were fighting the powerful psychological horror of the isolation, the sheer volume of water and the freezing temperatures. In your case, you're not fighting concrete, but the cold, deliberate psychology of the door. You hear no footsteps outside, no chuckle, no triumphant rasp from the neighbor, just silence. The entity or the accomplice locked the door and simply left. They executed the final step of the plan and walked away, certain of your fate. Still, quiet. Now, the irony, the dark, acidic humor of the situation forces a dry laugh from your throat. I always wanted an apartment with good security, you choke out, but I didn't realize that the security was for keeping me in. It's like a reverse prison, but with better kitchen appliances. The immediate, crippling need for freedom gives way to a desperate academic curiosity. You are trapped, so you must now become the master engineer of your cage. You begin to explore the other side of the lock, seeking a structural weakness or a hidden meaning in the mechanism itself. You feel around the edge of the door, where the bolt slides into the jamb. You find the point where the heavy brass bolt meets the metal strike plate in the doorframe. You can feel the slight lip of the bolt, the minuscule gap that separates the brass from the steel. This is where the weakness must lie. You grab your flimsy metal skewer, your only tool, and wedge it into the space, applying every bit of leverage you possess, trying to bend the strike plate to force the bolt back into its housing. The metal screams, a high-pitched, thin shriek of protesting steel. It's too thick, too deep, too sturdy. You remember an obscure or fringe horror tidbit about doors and thresholds, the superstition that doors and windows are the primary conduits for spirits, and that to make a door impenetrable, you must seal it with a symbol or sigil drawn in blood or iron. The structure of the lock itself, this over-engineered external access deadbolt, feels like a physical sigil, a deliberate piece of architectural magic designed to capture. You pause your frantic efforts. You have to save your strength. You look up at the peephole now, a tiny, useless circle of distorted yellow glass, and then down at the deadbolt. You realize the master keyhole is not just an access point, it's a signal receiver. The scholarly phrasing arrives, a mocking commentary on your failure. Researchers disagree on whether the presence of insurmountable physical barriers causes a subject to retreat into purely cognitive problem-solving, or if it simply magnifies the pre-existing psychological defense mechanisms, leading to an inevitable breakdown. You are certainly magnifying something, the absolute certainty of your powerlessness. You try to find a third piece of dark humor, a final slice of wit before the terror consumes you whole. I've heard of apartments being cozy and intimate, but this is the first time I've signed a lease that explicitly stated, "This unit will be your final resting place. Please keep noise to a minimum." You sit there for a long time, listening to the silence of the hallway, the silence of the accomplice, the silence of the key, which is now resting comfortably in some pocket miles away, its job done. You are left alone with the true heart of the apartment, the door itself. And that's when the silence breaks. It's not a sound you can categorize, not a scrape or a clunk or a whisper. It's a vibration that starts deep within the wood of the door, a low tectonic hum that travels from the base of the door, up the frame, and into your back, pressing against you with a cold, resonant force. The door, having completed the physical act of entrapment, is ready to begin the final psychological phase. The vibration is all-encompassing, a low, subterranean hum traveling from the door through your spine. You scramble away from the wood, staring at the institutional green slab now throbbing with an internal, resonant energy. You are trapped, and the door is alive. Your panic is now replaced by a chilling clarity. You know you are no longer fighting the landlord or the neighbor. You are fighting the architecture, and you are locked in, utterly alone. The sheer helplessness reminds you of a historical psychological phenomenon, the bystander effect, where the presence of multiple witnesses paradoxically decreases the chance that any one of them will intervene in an emergency. You know there are people in the building, maybe the gone man in 3D, maybe the silent tenants above, but the door has enforced a perfect psychological bystander effect. Everyone who could help is either complicit or too afraid to break the stillness. You grab a knife from your backpack, a flimsy camping tool, useless against the deadbolt, but a psychological comfort. You walk back to the door, not to escape, but to inspect. If the deadbolt is this strong, there must be a secret. You focus on the master keyhole, the circular brass slot on the outside, and its negative on the inside. You realize that a lock is a two-sided mirror. One side is security, the other is a structural void. You start pressing around the brass housing on the inside, feeling for any loose screws, any soft points in the wood. You find none. The carpentry is solid, built to last. You need a piece of darkly humorous joke to cut through the mounting, suffocating air. I tried to call the landlord again. I said, "I think your door has a mind of its own." He said, "Great, you owe me an extra $50 for the sentient security feature amenity charge. You can't win." You notice something in the wood grain near the frame. It's not the gouge from the scraping, but a pattern of faint, tiny pinpricks, arranged in a strange, non-linear pattern. They look like old wormholes, or perhaps places where someone had repeatedly tried to pick the latch lock years ago. You remember an obscure or fringe horror tidbit about lock mechanisms. The belief that the internal workings of a lock can be seen as a sigil or a spiritual diagram. The complexity of the tumblers, the cuts of the key, they aren't just mechanics, they are lines of power. The pinpricks are an attempt to disrupt that sigil, to break the door's control. You realize the heavy, intricate deadbolt itself is the meaning. Its purpose is to physically manifest the apartment's isolation, making it impossible to deny. The scholarly phrasing confirms your deepening existential dread. Researchers disagree on whether the human mind's capacity to recognize pattern and intention in inanimate objects is a cognitive error called pareidolia, or if it represents an evolutionary ability to perceive genuine non-human agency in the environment. You know the difference between seeing a face in the wood and feeling the wood hum with intention. You turn your attention to the scraping message again. Still, quiet, now. You realize that the message wasn't just an instruction for the accomplice, it was a prediction. The entity knew the locking would reduce you to stillness and silence. You run your knife along the inside edge of the door, gently scraping away the layers of institutional green paint, trying to find the historical layers beneath. You expose an older, darker layer of paint, a deep, bruised black, and then a layer of faded red, barely visible. You find another darkly humorous joke as you dig into the paint. I thought about tunneling out, but the neighbor probably has a list of acceptable home renovations, and spontaneous, frantic escape tunnel isn't on it. You are left with the core mechanism of the door, the heavy, dark wood vibrating against your touch. The vibration isn't random. It's slow, rhythmic, and it's intensifying. You manage a final piece of dry wit. I'm not worried about running out of food. I'm worried about the door running out of silence. That's when the real party starts. The hum turns into a low, deep thrum, a sound that resonates in your teeth. You realize the door isn't just vibrating, it's attempting to form sound, it's trying to speak. The final, terrifying confrontation is here, and it's not with a person, but with the very structure of your prison. The low thrumming has ceased to be a mere vibration. It's forming an oral texture, a sound that seems to originate not from the air, but from the dense, dark wood itself. You place your hand back on the door, and the sound travels up your arm, a low, resonant whisper, vibrating across your palm, just at the edge of human hearing. The door is revealing its true nature. You press your ear against the cold, old paint, trying to decipher the barely formed sounds. It's not English. It's not a human language at all. It's a sound of deep, guttural satisfaction, a long, drawn-out sibilance that sounds like 1,000 voices whispering a single terrible word. You focus, straining your exhausted, terrified mind to impose a meaning upon the sound. The low whisper seems to coalesce into a single, terrifying thought. Welcome. The door is a sentient entity, a piece of dark architectural consciousness that thrives on the isolation it imposes, that needs the stillness, the quiet, the fear of the tenant to sustain itself. The deadbolt was its feeding mechanism, the neighbor its delivery system, and your fear its nutrient. The feeling is one of profound, total, uncanny valley horror, a concept that reminds you of the psychological fact that extreme discomfort arises when something looks or acts almost, but not quite, human. This door is almost, but not quite, inanimate. You try to find one last, desperate joke, but the dry wit is gone, replaced by a deep, final terror. "I should have known this apartment was bad luck," you whisper to the wood. The previous tenant's review just said, "Great location, but the checkout process is complicated." And that's all. I should have listened. You pull away from the wood, staring at the deadbolt mechanism. You realize the lock wasn't designed to keep something out, but to keep something in, and that something is you. You recall an obscure or fringe horror tidbit about elementals, nature spirits tied to specific elements like rock, water, or in this case, old-growth wood. The door is not a ghost. It's an elemental of entrapment, an ancient, patient spirit tied to the dense, dark oak which was used to enforce the isolation. The scholarly phrasing is now entirely personal, entirely internal. Researchers disagree on whether the final moment of profound, irreversible terror triggers a release of neurological chemicals that can be categorized as a form of ecstasy, or if the individual remains lucid and aware of the horror until the moment of extinction. You are lucid, you are aware, and the door is whispering its satisfaction. The final realization: the neighbor didn't need a key to lock you in. He just needed to perform the final act of intention, the psychological trigger that allowed the element to engage itself. The clunk was the sound of the elemental accepting its meal. You hear the whisper again, louder now, and it seems to form a final, cold, darkly humorous phrase, a last cruel joke delivered by the wood itself. The only amenity you need now is silence. You are still, and you are quiet, exactly as the pattern predicted. The space is closing in. The air is thick with the door's slow, cold breathing, and you know this is the final, endless night of the locksmith's lament. The vibration softens now, pulling back into the wood, becoming a gentle, almost imperceptible low thrum again. The adrenaline that kept you sharp for these long hours is finally, mercifully draining away. You are left with a quiet, settling exhaustion, a profound and complete lack of will. The terror hasn't disappeared, but it has softened, blurred by the haze of defeat. The apartment is darker now, the distant city hum, a faint lullaby-like murmur. You close your eyes, the institutional green of the door, a fading image behind your eyelids. You don't fight the silence anymore. You don't strain to hear the key or the scrape. There is only the presence of the wood holding you gently now, having won its long, patient game. The air feels heavy, like a velvet curtain draped over your mind, pulling you down. You are where the door wanted you to be, still, quiet, now. The exhaustion is a friend now, a soft, heavy blanket. You feel the cold floor beneath you, the rough fabric of your shirt, the silence of the room. Every muscle in your body is loose, surrendered. You let go of the keys, the flimsy metal skewer, the notepad full of frantic scribbles. They settle quietly on the floor, joining the dust and the regret. The apartment is yours now, and you are the apartment's. There is a slow, rhythmic movement in the darkness, a gentle sighing sound that might be the building settling, or might be the contented breath of the wood that holds you. Just rest now. There is no need for keys, no need for light, no need for escape, just the deep, final comfort of the quiet, the soft, heavy, eternal quiet.